While low prices are pressuring producers, the U.S. dairy herd is growing to its largest size in 20 years. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is forecasting an increase in the number of milk cows through the third and fourth quarters of 2016 into the first and second quarters of 2017. Annual demand for dairy products in the United States has flipped over the past 40 years. Per-person milk consumption in 2015 was the lowest on record, with data dating back to 1975. But the average American is eating more butter and more cheese than ever before. Over the past few months, the USDA has stepped in twice, announcing cheese purchases of about $40 million. It said in August the cheese surplus had climbed to 30-year highs. Scott Brown is an extension ag economist at the University of Missouri. We spoke with him last Friday about U.S. milk production, risk management for producers, and the current profitability environment across the country.
I think when you look at 2016, it's been a very tough year. Milk prices certainly fell as we entered 2016, and we've continued in a situation where milk prices for most folks around this country have not allowed them to break even, so it's been a very tough financial year for producers thus far. And although we have gotten some price increase the last 60 days or so, we're still seeing a lot of stress out there, especially in some parts of the country. I'll say the Northeast in particular, where drought coupled with what's been lower milk prices has made it a pretty tough road for many of those producers.
How has productivity contributed to this oversupply?
Well, it's certainly been a big part of what we've had happening in 2016 with milk yields that continue to be 1.5% above a year ago levels. For many producers around the country, it has put more supplies of milk on the marketplace, and frankly, we're just full in a lot of places around the country, and finding that home for the last trailer load of milk gets pretty tough, and sometimes that has meant some pretty low prices as milk has to move at pretty distressed levels.
That most recent milk production report, does that echo that?
It absolutely does. You know, it's amazing when you look at the milk production report that we just got out. You have states like Texas, South Dakota, Michigan, I think plus a 5% milk production growth relative to a year ago out of the last report. It is amazing that we're continuing to get the advancement in milk supplies in 2016, despite what's been a pretty tough year from a profitability standpoint. We've had a very tough time getting producers to turn off that milk spigot in these lower returns, and milk yields has been a big part of that.
Why is it so hard to get them to turn away from that, Scott?
I think when you look at this, the structure of the industry that we have today in the dairy side, we certainly have a lot of folks who have no option. They're either going to produce milk until the bank tells them they can't, and there's really no alternative. And even if we see some of these larger operations that go out of business, they tend to be sold for cents on the dollar, and they keep producing milk. And so I will continue to say one of my very large concerns for dairy producers across the country today is that we're just so unresponsive to low returns. And that's certainly the case today. And if you look at USDA right now, they're saying we're going to have 1.5% to 2% milk production growth for much of 2017 as well. And if we continue that pace, I'm worried about what milk prices look like for producers going into next year as well.
If you look at the USDA stats on per-person consumption of dairy products, milk is at an all-time low going back to 1975, but Americans are eating more cheese and butter. What does that mean for demand and the environment for dairy products?
Yeah, so thank goodness we have that demand growth in places like butter and cheese. I joke all the time about where do we find the next place to put cheese on a pizza. We've got it in the crust, more on top of the crust. I worry about the day that cheese demand slows from what's been a very good picture the last few years. Butter's been the other side of that, where we've seen a lot of manufacturers or those making products turning back to butter for that fat in their product, consumers liking the taste. Those things have been very helpful. If any of those were to falter, especially given what's been an export market that's been a little tougher to deal with a stronger dollar, domestic markets have been much more important to us, and we can't grow milk production if we don't see those kinds of growths in things like butter and cheese consumption in this country today.
Let's close out talking about risk management. How much support might producers get from that margin protection program?
Yeah, I think when you talk to producers today, they'll say they get very little support from the margin protection program that we passed in the 2014 Farm Bill. that they feel like it's been a very stressful year here in 2016, and unless they had bought up substantially in terms of coverage, they aren't getting payments. I think when we passed the Farm Bill with the margin protection program in it, none of us would have ever thought we were going to talk about $3 corn. And so feed costs have come down considerably for many producers on the dairy front. And some of them who are actually producing their own feed instead of buying their own feed have really not seen production costs for growing that acre of corn silage or that acre of corn go down hardly at all from the peaks of corn prices that we saw a few years ago. And so I think the MPP margin has missed where really actual feed costs fit for many of these folks. But for right now, I think many in the industry are looking for help in terms of risk management. Perhaps that's something that lays the groundwork as we look ahead to the next Farm Bill, whether that's 2017 or beyond, in terms of how do we make a better risk management product for producers in this country.
As Scott mentioned, milk production in September was up from a year ago. Production per cow was the highest for that month since data began in 2003.